Today's video, I'm going to show you how I edit a fall shot at the tail of the dragon. Now, this one was shot at Toge Fest in early November of last year. And as I recall, it was super cold that morning, but the lighting was absolutely perfect. So let's get into this. So, before I started doing this, I made a preset of what I would do for fall shots on the dragon. So it's just going to make things so much easier than having to do everything from start to finish from scratch. Because why work harder when you can work smarter, right? So I'm going to have this image and the preset in a Google Drive folder, and I'll put the link in the description. And y'all could either follow along and maybe learn a thing or two, or just use the preset in the fall, or you can customize it to your liking for whatever you like. Now, I'm going to try and do some more videos like this in the next few months because uh, as of next February, I will be leaving the Dragon and East Tennessee. So I'm hoping I can pass on some of my knowledge to some of the other photographers out there. So let's get started. First thing I'm going to do is obviously apply this preset because, I mean, that's the before, that's the after. It reduces a lot of the contrast, but we'll get back to that in a little bit. So every time I start a photo, I always check the auto just to see what it does. Sometimes it does a good job, sometimes it doesn't. It looks like on this one, all it does is just add a little bit of contrast, which I'm just going to add that later, so we're not going to do it. Now, the little HDR thing kind of makes it look cool, but nothing really supports it, so it's practically useless right now. So the white balance, that's what auto thinks it is. It was not that blue out. It was very sunny. Cloudy is probably the closest thing, but with this one, I really don't have to use it at all. So this is just like a generic preset. So I'm going to kind of fine tune it and tweak it to my liking. You don't have to do the same, but it's kind of like a generic one size fits all type thing. So with this one, I'm actually going to bring up the exposure just a little bit. Just enough to kind of make the blacks look a little more gray. But I'll fix it in a little bit. Now the contrast, I could use this and make it look a lot better, but I don't think I'm going to, because I will be doing that with the tone curve, which you kind of have a little more fine detail on it. The highlights, the whole side of that car is a little too bright, so I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. Shadows are obviously way too high, so I'm going to bring that down a little bit. Blacks, I might just bring up just a touch. And the whites, I might just leave them as they are. Now clarity, this is where a lot of people kind of go overboard with it. They usually just jack it up and make it look super crunchy. But I actually go the other way and soften it up a little bit. Texture, I won't use this because I have a mask that I'll use it on. The dehaze. Now there's a little bit of mist, haze, fog, whatever you want to call it, up here. So if you use it, it's just going to add a little more contrast. But if you do it the other way, it kind of softens it and leaves a little glow. So that's what I'm going to go with. Now the vibrance, it looks like this image is a little too vibrant, a little too saturated, so I'm going to bring that down just a touch. But at the same time, I'm going to bring up the vibrance. It's not something you have to do, but it's something that I usually do. If I subtract one, I'll add the same amount of the other. So next, don't really need to do the transform thing just yet. So we're going to skip down to the tone curve. Now every now and again I'll use this and just make like a basic little S curve, but not usually. Try and get that centered. Now if you want to make the blacks a little more gray, you can bring that side up, but I don't think we're going to do that on this one. This is the one that I use, this one with the little squiggly thing, because it's the most useful in my opinion. Now all I do is I just kind of play with them back and forth till it looks good. You can kind of see how it's doing its thing. Now I don't really have a set number for any of these. I kind of just go back and forth until it looks good. The shadows I usually bring down a little more than the rest. So now the color mixer. This is where it gets interesting. Ever since they brought this out, I use it for practically everything. So right now, what I'm going to do is try and bring those greens up just a little bit on the car. Just a little bit. And now I'm going to try and make these reds, orange, whatever color this is, just a little more fiery red. Bring up the vibrance, or the luminance, just a little bit. And for the last one, I'm going to do these yellows. Now I can easily change it to where they're all either green or like a reddish, but I'm going to leave that as is. So I'm just going to bring up the saturation a touch, and I might just leave that as is. Now the color grading. I like using this because I like making the shadows a little cooler. So I usually just keep it at a nice blue for the shadows. And I'll bring it up to about 5 or so. It's very subtle. But then I'll sit here and just play with that back and forth until I think it looks good. Now the blending I always put up to 100. The midtones. This is usually what makes or breaks the image. Sometimes I go brighter, but I think this time we're going to go a little bit darker. And the highlights, I'm kind of just going to maybe do that. Make it a nice yellow orange. Bring it up like about there. Detail. So the masking, I use a Mac, so I just hold down the Option button. I think it's Alt on a PC. It's been so long since I've used a Windows computer, I don't even remember. But instead of sharpening the entire image, I'll just bring it down. Now, everything that's white is going to be sharpened, and everything is black. Everything that is black is going to be ignored. So I always do the sharpening amount at 50. The masking I'll kind of fiddle with until it looks good. Noise reduction, we're actually going to do that last because I shot this at ISO 800 and it's a little grainy. Lens corrections, I leave that at auto effects. If I wanted to put a vignette on it, which I just might. There we go. Midpoint, you kind of bring it in to kind of focus it into the center a little bit. Everything else I don't touch. Calibration. This is where you can change the colors. So for instance, the blue primary, you can turn it very orange or very green. I'm actually going to leave that as is. But you can also adjust the saturation on it, which I think I might bring it up just a smidge. Same thing with the green, you can make it yellow or you can make it orange. This one we don't really have to touch it. Saturation though, it applies it to different color channels. So sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. But I think this one, I'm just going to leave it at that. Lens blur, we're not going to touch because I shot that at 5.6. It has enough. It threw out the background enough, and frankly, I don't particularly care for it. Now the fun part, the masking. So I always do the subject first. I don't know why it cut out some of these little green things, so I'm just going to add that with the brush, just to get the whole thing. Now I made a custom one to make it crunchy. All it does is just add a touch of contrast and a little bit of texture and a little less clarity and a little more sharpness and noise reduction. That's all I do to the subject. Well, in the beginning. I might do something with it later. So next, I take a radial gradient, zoom all the way out, and we're going to fake a sun ray. I'll show you how I do it. Go off this image. Wow, I can't even talk. You kind of focus it into a little beam. And if I remember correctly, the sun was over this way, so it would be shining down. Now, I also made another little preset thing simulating the sun. As you can see, let me get rid of this thing. As you can see, it simulated the sun. But it's a little too much, so I bring it down. And all I did was just add a little bit of exposure, up the color temperature a little bit, added a little dehaze and negative clarity, or negative dehaze, negative clarity, and added a little bit of orange, 40% at color 30. Bring this back to the corner, otherwise I will be annoyed by it. So the next thing is we're going to do the luminance thing and try and target just the shadows. Probably won't work, but you never know. I don't think it's going to, so I'm probably just wasting my time on this. Where is clarity? There it is. Add that a little bit. Let's do a linear gradient. If you hold shift, it'll keep it nice and level. We're going to subtract the subject. And we're going to bring the shadows down a little bit to kind of give it a little more depth. And now I'm going to do a radial in the back where that little bit of mist was. Get rid of the car. Play with the dehaze a little bit. And the clarity. Add a little bit of contrast. And now put this on the side of the car. Give it a little bit of a glow, because that sun was kind of harsh on that. Zoom in. As you can see, it did create a slight glow, ever so slight. So now I think we are done with that. Might try and get rid of this little Miata right here real quick. Now I'm so glad they came out with this generative AI thing, because it is a game changer. Zoom in a little more. Let's see if we can get rid of this little Miata. Don't think we're going to be able to because of the spoiler, but what's the worst that could happen? Yep, it's gone into the car. So if you hold the Option or the Alt button, it'll delete whatever it is that it's selected. Let's see if we can get rid of everything that was selected on the car. It looks good enough for my house. And we're going to hit apply. We're going to let it do its thing. Oh, look at that, it actually got rid of it for the most part. And it added a mirror. So you know what? I think we're just going to leave it there. It didn't do a very good job at it. And it's really not that noticeable. So last but not least, we're going to go into the denoise thing. I always leave it at 60 so it's not too much, but not too little. And as you'll see, this Honda logo gets rid of all the noise. You just hit enhance, let it do its thing, and then when it's done, you just export it, and that's it. Now you could crop it, which I would actually crop this to a kind of like a wide shot, like a 21:9. Bring it down like that, or maybe even a 16:9. I kind of like that. And that's it. We're just going to hit export. And now it's going to export it to the desktop or wherever you export your photos. So yeah, that's how I would do a fall shot on the tail of the dragon. I hope this helped somebody. If not, shoot me a message. Or if you have a request of something else you want to learn or follow along with, or some sort of advice, just let me know. I want to try and pass on as much information as I can to the local photographers before I leave. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.